Good afternoon, everybody. So today is Dr. Bình. We will be talking about one subject in diagnostic accuracy for smartphone corneal photography for detection corneal opacity. So as you know, doctor, right now we have a smartphone, so there's use smartphone for detection for corneal opacity is very useful for everybody here. So we are eager to see your presentation. Okay.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to present my work today. So, my talk today is about the diagnostic accuracy of smartphone corneal photography for detections of corneal opacities, a community-based study. So, corneal photography is a promising tool to detect corneal opacity or corneal ulcers in the communities. And previous literatures have suggested that smartphone cameras may provide adequate diagnostic accuracy if paired with an external attachment that can enhance the illuminations and magnifications of the device. However, these studies have some limitations. For example, most of them have low number of opacities, or all participants were enrolled at an eye clinic rather than in a community. And corneal photographs in those studies were mostly taken by ophthalmologists, but in reality, smartphones may be more frequently used by non-ophthalmic personnel rather than professional ophthalmologists. So the objective of this analysis is to assess the diagnostic accuracies of smartphone device when used by non-specialists in the Village Integrated Eye Worker Trial, also known as the VIEW trial, which is a community randomized trial. So methods. So as I said earlier, the analysis in this study is based from a sample in the VIEW trial. The design and method of the VIEW trial was discussed in detail in a separate paper. However, to recap briefly, the VIEW trial is a cluster randomized trial in which 24 village communities in Nepal were randomized to a corneal ulcer prevention program or to no interventions. The participants in the studies had their cornea imaged annually by non-ophthalmic personnel, and then these images were created by photograders. The study participants in this study who were charged to have a corneal opacity in either eye were invited for comprehensive eye examinations approximately a year after their first reported corneal tumor or infections. We also selected a random sample of controls matched based on age, sex, and community, and invited these people to the follow-up comprehensive eye examination as well. The follow-up visits were preferably conducted at an eye hospital or a primary eye care center. However, if participants could not attend to one of these facilities, a mobile team will visit them at their home and examine their eyes. The examiners were masked to the case control status of the participants. So in this analysis, the results of the smartphone photographs are compared with the results of the eye examination to determine the diagnostic accuracies of the corneal photographs. So a little bit about the device that we use to image participants' cornea. So corneal photographs were taken with a Nexus 5 smartphone coupled with a corneal cellscope. So the corneal cellscope is a smartphone attachment that consists of a 25 diopter lens that allows the magnifications and two light sources that allow the illumination. So individuals were designated as cases if corneal images revealed incidence opacity, and a subset of these images were then assessed for the likely cause and site of the opacities. For the cause of the opacity, we are most interested in distinguishing infections from pneumokeratitis. So these are some examples of the corneal image from the participants. The one on the left is characterized as opacity secondary to infections, and the one on the right was characterized as pneumokeratitis. So opacity secondary to bacterial or fungal infections is typically characterized by a single scar with rounded borders or a main scar with satellite lesions. Whereas pneumokeratitis is typically characterized by a multifocal scar that spread across the cornea, as you can see in this figure here. So for eye examinations, so as I mentioned earlier, those who could not present to the eye hospital only had the penlight exam. During the penlight exam, the examiners will report the size and location of the opacity, and the size were recorded as small, medium, or large. And for those who presented to the hospital, we'll have both slit lamp and penlight exam. During the slit lamp exams, the examiners also recorded size and location of the opacity, but the size will be recorded as the geometric mean of the longest diameter and its longest perpendicular diameter. So in this analysis, positive and negative predicted values for the smartphone-based corneal photographs were determined at participant level and eye level relative to the penlight or slit lamp exam reference standard. Sensitivity analysis were conducted based on opacity, size, type, and location. So now, I'm going to talk about the results of our study. So as you can see in this study flow, we identify 666 people who had opacity on corneal photographs, and for these people, we selected 666 controls based on age, sex, and community. So in the group cases, 131 people were lost to follow-up, so only 535 people had a penlight exam either at a hospital or at the mobile clinics. And among these people, 39 people had bilateral opacity, 215 had unilateral opacity on the penlight exam. So the positive predicted value of the corneal photographs in reference to the penlight exam is 47%. In contrast, in the control groups, only 562 people had the penlight exams, and among these people, 26 of them had the opacity missed on the corneal photographs. So the negative predicted value of corneal photograph using penlight exam as the reference standard is 95%. So similarly, in the case groups, 120 people had the slit lamp exams, and among these people, 28 had bilateral opacity and 57 had unilateral opacities. So the positive predicted value of corneal photographs using slit lamp exam as the reference standard is 71%, and the negative predicted value of the corneal photograph using the slit lamp exam is 95%. Is 80%, with 95% confidence interval is 70 to 88%. So those numbers above are the predicted values of corneal photographs at the participant level. And when we look at the data at the eye level, we got similar results for the predicted value of corneal photographs. So at the eye level, the positive predicted value of the corneal photographs using penlight exam is 43%, and negative predicted value is 90%. And when we use the slit lamp exam as the reference standard, the positive predicted value is 65%, and negative predicted value is 74%. So now we focus on the people who had opacity detected on the penlight exam. So this graph here included only people who had opacity detected on the penlight exam, and the column on the right represents people who had opacity detected on both corneal photographs and on the penlight exam. Column on the left represents the opacity that were missed on the corneal photographs. So as you can see here, among the people with the missed opacity on the corneal photographs, more than 80% were characterized as small scar, whereas for those who had opacity detected on both corneal photograph and pen light, only 50% were characterized as small scars. So these findings show that corneal photograph tend to miss small scars on the pen light exam. And for this graph here, we focus on the opacity, the people who had opacity detected on slit lamp exam. So for the box on, similar to the graph above, for the box on the right, these people represent, this boxes represent people who had opacity detected on both corneal graph and slit lamp exam. And the box on the left represents the opacities that were missed on the corneal photographs. So for these people, the mean size of scar of these opacities is around 0.75 millimeter, whereas in this group, the mean size of the scar or the opacity is 2.2 millimeters, and the difference between these two groups are statistically significant. So this graph shows that, again, it supports a similar finding as the above graph, that corneal photograph tends to miss small scars. So this table here has a lot of numbers which I want to go into detail, but basically what this table trying to say is that we calculate a positive predicted value of corneal photographs stratified by the suspected cause of opacity like infections, nuclear keratitis, and other categories, and we didn't find any statistically significant difference among these groups. And lastly, when we look at the positive and negative predicted value with different reference standards by adjusting the size of the cornea, we noticed that the negative predicted value of corneal photographs was higher when the reference standard was considered to be detections of a larger corneal scar. So if you look at this point right here, so for this point, the reference standard is basically the detections of the presence of the corneal scar. So as we mentioned earlier, the negative predicted value here is 74%. However, if we consider the reference standards as the detections of the corneal scars of greater than 1 millimeter, then the negative predicted value here is 95%, meaning that like among 100 people with the corneal scars greater than 1 millimeter, corneal photographs only miss 5 people. And as you can see, if we increase the size of the corneal scar, the negative predicted values getting higher and higher. So what it means here is that corneal photographs tends to miss smaller scars. So now I'm going to discuss the findings of this study. So for this study, the original intentions was to perform the slit lamp exam for most of the participants. However, in practice, a lot of participants could not present to the clinics due to time and financial constraints, so the majority of them only had pen light exam. And because pen light exam is less sensitive than the slit lamp exam, we think that the predicted values of the corneal photographs using the slit lamp exam may be more accurate. However, it is possible that there are inherent differences in the characteristics among those who could and could not present to the hospital, and that could potentially introduce bias to the result. And findings in our study are also comparable to a previous study conducted in a hospital-based setting, which reported that corneal photographs tend to miss smaller scars. And there are multiple reasons that small scars can be challenging to be detected. So one of those is that the artifacts. So when we take the pictures of the cornea, and then when we look at it, it's possible that we can see the reflections of the light in the cornea, or sometimes we can see the reflection of the patient's eyelashes or their nose, or sometimes the reflections of the nails of the person who took the photos. So those artifacts may confuse the photo graders, and that will make more challenging to detect small scars on the corneal photographs. However, it's likely that smallest opacity are not visually significant, therefore missing those small scars may not have a significant consequence on the patient. And For this study, the positive predictive value of the corneal photographs is about 40-60%, which seem not to be ideal. However, remember that the positive predictive value is inherently limited by the prevalence. And because the prevalence of corneal opacity in the community is so slow, so it's very challenging to get a high positive predictive value, no matter how good the equipment is. So the positive predictive value of corneal photograph in this study is about 40-60%, which is considered pretty good given the low prevalence of the corneal opacity in the communities. Therefore, we conclude that corneal cell scope is a valid tool for assessing corneal opacities in the community-based setting. And also, for this study, corneal photography was used in a community randomized trials, but it can also be used in other settings, such as in telemedicine applications, or it can also be incorporated in a rapid assessment of avoidable blindness survey, which is a survey that was meant to seek the most common cause of blindness. So this study also has some limitations. The first one is that we focus more on positive and negative predictive value rather than the sensitivity and specificity. This is simply because of the design of this study. And another limitation is that there was a considerable lapse of time between the time we took the corneal photograph and the time the patients had an exam, which is like a year. So during this time, it's possible that maybe the participant initially they didn't have the scar, but like over time they can develop a scar. Or vice versa, like maybe they initially had a scar on the cornea, but then over time that scars like heal and the patients recover, especially for participants with pneumokeratitis. However, in our stratified analysis, we didn't find any significant difference between patients with pneumokeratitis and patients who have opacity secondary to infections. And the last limitation is a point that I mentioned earlier, that only a minority of participants actually presented for the slit lamp exam, which can introduce bias to the findings. So in conclusions, a smartphone camera coupled to an attachment to enhance magnification and illumination had acceptable positive and negative predictive value for detecting a corneal scar when used in a community-based setting, especially when we wanted to detect corneal opacity greater than 1 millimeter. And corneal smartphone photography is well suited for community-based studies, given its portability and ease of use, and may have telemedicine applications in places where ophthalmologists and slit lamp biomicroscopes are not readily available. And lastly, I just want to thank you all the organizations that support me during my fellowship, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
So, any question for Dr. Bin? I know in our hospital right now there's some doctor, they are also using the smartphones for taking a picture. And I know Dr. Chi, she's an engineer ophthalmologist, and she can apply for take many pictures for the patient here. So you have any question for Dr. Bin?
Thank you for the very interesting study. And I just wonder that if the author ever used that corneal scope, cell scope for detecting other disease than corneal scope, for example, cataract vision. Because in the community, yeah, that's a very common problem for people other than corneal scope.
Yeah, thank you for Dr. Chi's questions. That's an interesting question. So, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that they actually use corneal cell scope to detect the cataract yet. But in theory, I guess it's possible. But I don't think they ever tested yet. And initially, I think the authors actually designed the corneal cystoscope to look at the corneal opacity. But I guess potentially it can have application in detecting other like anterior segment disorder as well.
So for my questions, I would like to ask you, when you use the picture for the corneal observation, do you do any specific treatment attached to your smartphone for the picture is more detailed? And do you have any experience for the picture by smartphone when you take the retinal image? For example, diabetic retinopathy or for the text for early sign.
So I just want to clarify your question. So you're asking if we ever actually use this device to take pictures of the retina, or?
No. For example, if you take a picture is from cornea, so do you use any specific device for easier detection?
Yes. For the retina.
But no, for cornea as well, and also for retina. Of course, retinal you have some specific device. But for the cornea, do you have attached for any device for your smartphone as well?
So I know that like there are like a lot of so this is just one of the innovations. There are actually a lot of like all the devices that was designed to attach to the smartphone and to take the pictures of the anterior surface of the eyes. For this study, we only in our groups we only use this one, and for the retina, I know that they also have like all the tools and devices as well. But I don't know if I answered your questions. It's your question that like, do we have like any other attachment that can specifically look at the cornea? So I think this is in our study we only use this one to look at the anterior surface of the eye. We didn't compare this with like other smartphone attachment that are available from other study or commercially available. We just focus on testing this, the sensitivity, the diagnostic accuracy of this specific device, but we haven't compared it with like other smartphone attachment yet.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Or Dr. B? Yes, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. B, for your presentations. I'd like to know more about the smartphone technique, and for the community health worker, they use the smartphone and they take the picture, and then the picture will be interpreted by themselves, or the picture was sent to the eye doctor for interpretation.
Yes, thank you for your questions. This is a very interesting questions, and actually the whole protocol of the view trial of how they take the photo and interpreted it. The photo was described in detail in the view paper, but from what I read from the paper, basically for the census worker who actually go to the patient home and to take the cornea, they will attend some training sections first to learn how to take a proper corneal image, and then basically people just show them like how to focus on the cornea and the proper distance, etc. And after the images, after that, the images were uploaded to a database, and it will be great. It will went through multiple rounds of grading. So initially, it was graded by 2 photo graders. So these people, they are not ophthalmologists; they just non-ophthalmic personnel. And when they graded, they would classify the pictures as like no opacity, possible opacity, probable opacity, or definite opacities. And after it was graded by 2 photo graders, these images were then were confirmed by the ophthalmologist again to resolve any conflict. And they also had 3 ophthalmologists to look at all of these photos. And initially, only one ophthalmologist is going to look at this photo, but if there are conflicting results between two ophthalmologists, then all three ophthalmologists are going to look at all of the images and getting the consensus on the final result.
Okay, thank you. And from your study, we can see that there are three ways to find out the opacity in the cornea, that let's say smartphone, that one, and then the pen light, we use a pen light to see if the patient have opacity or not, and the last one by slit lamp. And of course, for ophthalmologists, slit lamp, it look like is the most important thing.